Okay, welcome back to, this is part 3 now of creating the quickbooks-ruby-base gem, and I stopped off here. I'm still working on this OAuth client method, and let's make this pane larger so you can see what's going on. Alright, now I created a configuration piece last time, so we're going to want to tie into that, and let's make, so instead of having these calls directly like account settings, QB token, let's make methods for retrieving that information based off of our configuration module that we set up. And this is sort of an interesting problem too. So I'm kind of like now back in design mode again. Now how am I going to accomplish this? Basically kind of need to kind of eval this account settings QB token, and I didn't mention that I did a default to settings, this settings QB token. I think a lot of users of this gem are going to have a similar pattern of using serialized settings. There's different gems that do this, and I made that the default. So how do I retrieve, which can be actually multiple levels? So you're going to have the account object. You could have just, some user might have off of the their account object like a one level deep in kind of QB token. They're probably going to have another model that they're associated with that's like settings QB token. Now, so how am I going to achieve that? And I'm going to paste in code here again. This is what I came up with, and it's, let's fix this first. That formatting gets so bad. Okay, and this is going to be a retrieve method. What you would pass in there is something like, let's make another method here. So you would pass in, you'd maybe have a method like token that would call the retrieve. In there you would put token, something like that. That would make that persistent token string, which is the method. You would send that into quickbooks-base. Again, it's a class method, so you would send it in like this. Now what becomes interesting is, what if you have this default of settings.qb token? And to accomplish that, what I'm doing here is going to put in this method, but beforehand we're going to split up this string by its by a dot, and it's going to create a array which we're going to put into this method called sendChain. And this sendChain I just got off of Stack Overflow, but what this basically will enable you to do is to do something like account send settings send QB token. Alright, so you can handle as many depths as possible. So we're going to need to start testing this. So let's get into that. Now this is the way I did design it. I came up with a design first, and now I'm going to test it. Now that I like the design, I'm going to go into tests and start automating this process. Save, go to the spec, Alright, now again, I'm going to cut and paste some code in and then explain it. Let's go down and get this. I'm having to do this each time, which is not ideal. Okay. Alright, now here is the, so we're describing a retrieve, which is the retrieve method I just set up. And here I'm going to have to do an after block call for this testing of the retrieve method, and I need to clear off the configure items, a persistence token, persistent secret, and so on and so forth. So this is going to be a nice group of tests because it's also going to test our base configure code, which we haven't tested, by the way, yet. So we're going to be, this is the style I like to do too. I like to not do strict unit testing on each individual method, but to test multiple methods, not too many, but multiple methods and multiple things within a test. So let's take a look at this first test, and I'm going to run this test. So it's going to set up some persistent tokens. Now, these are going to be different than the default ones, and so this simply is going to test the persistent token location. And then we're going to do two expectations here where we just run the base method, base class method, and it should equal these two. So right here we're just testing really the configuration module we set up over here. So we're going to be testing these methods right now in this first test. Alright, so let's run those tests, and they do pass. And let me, as I'm running these tests, also even up these window panes. And let's move to the second test. Now here is, we're going to test that these locations are 2 configuration levels deep, which is the default, it says here. And let's again switch back so we have some more room here. Now within here, this is, so the default is the setting QB token or secret. So we need to test that that works. Now this is also going to exercise the send chain action here, which is a really fancy inject, where we're injecting the account, then the account gets applied to, it's going to apply the array, which is getting split up here, to the account. So account is the O, the A is the array that's getting pumped in, each one from the enumerable eject. So it's going to be exercising these. Let's get into that. That's too many details actually. So I just set the token as that because we're going to test to see that it equals that. Within that, I'm using the account. We're going to make, the count just needs to be any kind of object going in. So we can do some test doubles here. We're going to nest in a test double. And this is the equivalent of setting like account settings QB token equals the XXS up here. That's what this test double does. We're going to make a base. We're not going to use the let base up here. We need to make a special one because we need to pump in that test that we needed to pass in this specific account test double into here. So we can't use that QB base, so we're going to override that QR base. And so this is going to be the test expectation here to retrieve token. All right, because up here I set this retrieve token. So we're going to pump in the retrieve token. It's going to run through all of these, and it should be equal to this token up here. Okay, so let's run that test. I'm running individual tests here again with my leader command. Leader RL runs an individual test, and that also passes. So we're looking good. Down here is just one level deep. All right. So here we just do one level deep. There's no dots here. Okay, this is just one level deep. And in that test double here, we're just going one level deep too. Again, we need to pass that in to make a QR base object. A new instance of QR base, QuickBooks base, calling it QR base as a variable. We'll retrieve that token. That should equal this token again here. So let's run that individual test, and that of course passes because I'm doing a little bit of work behind the scenes to make sure the screencast goes a little faster. Even still, I think it'll go to about 5 parts. So the configuration code is working and the retrieval code is working. It's simulating retrieving from an object, this would be just like active record or whatever persistence object you're using. It could be data mapper also. And we tested send chain, but we didn't make a specific test for send chain. So we're kind of looping it in, and we didn't make specific tests for configuration, but we're kind of knocking it all out in this retrieve method test. No, I explained this wrong previously. Okay, so what is happening here, of course, or not of course, but we are calling the class method persistent token in this case. That returns the string, which by default is settings QB, and that's dynamic. And then it splits up that string based on a dot and gives you an array. Okay, so I just want to clarify that. Let's also make send chain private. Okay, let's rerun the test there. Okay, that looks good. We'll leave this as a public method. Could be useful to retrieve your token information. Let's just get rid of that because we can just do this now. We can just call retrieve token that retrieve secret and for this variable I'm just going to call this directly what did we call it down here? OAuth consumer. Okay, so let's just call that directly OAuth consumer. Okay, now we're ready to test the OAuth client method finally. Actually, let's go back to create service for. That's where it's all started. And let's test this method here. All right, so we got through, this is set up. We got this here. I'm going to want to change this because version 3 of QuickBooks is company ID. I also am going to want to retrieve the company ID here from our persistence method, and let's return the service. Again, these are things I know what I need from my class that I'm trying to abstract out into common methods. So let me go back to what I was doing here, and let's make a spec for this. So we're going to now test create service for method, and let's go into our spec. Let's drop this one down here. Okay, so we're going to test create service for method, and it creates an access token service. So that's just one of the services in QuickBooks. Doesn't really matter, just need to test one of them. I'm going to make an account double here. Just assign it basic information. This is all using the defaults, but I need to set up the account to look just like that. We're going to pass that in here, make a QB, a QuickBooks-base class with that account. Now, here I'm just going to call the method. If I go back to the initialize, you can pass it right in. But let's just test calling it directly. So we're not going to test the initialize. We just want to test this method directly here. Therefore, let's call it directly. And we're going to create a service for access token. It does take one argument here. That's the type that gets we're going to create that namespace through the QuickBooks Ruby service method. We already tested that. We're going to be in effect testing the code we just did for the OAuth client. This we've already tested, the retrieve method. And we're going to grab the company ID and return the service. I'm simply just going to right here just return the string of the class name back and match. That should give me a good idea, a good confidence level that this method is working correctly. So let's run the spec, and we got green, of course, because I've cut and pasted code from behind the scenes. But now we can continue to move on, which will have to be next time because I'm at 18 minutes. I want to keep them around 20, and then I'll be at part 4. Now in part 4 I'm going to start testing this by including it into a project that already has QuickBooks Ruby, so to test the extension, test that all the paths are in the right place and things like that. So that'll be in part 4. Hopefully I'll wrap it up in part 4. I want to be thorough at the same time, keep things moving quickly, but we'll see. Maybe there'll be a part 5 also. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.